The GST Council unanimously decided to impose a 28% GST for online gaming for casinos and horse racing, where GST will be levied on the full face value of the placed bets. 28% is, of course, the highest goods and services or GST tax slab. The earlier rate was 18%. So the increase is significant, but what was even more significant was the fact that it was on the entire value of the bet, and that's what got some eyebrows to be raised. So the government, of course, defended this entire move, and the GST Council and GST finance ministers across the board have been saying this was done unanimously, essentially saying that online gaming and gambling should be taxed as a sin good. And therefore, this was necessary both for raising revenue as well as to crack down on what was called illegal gambling. Now, the industry has disagreed with that, saying that a higher tax will not be effective in cracking down on illegal gambling because all of this is in any case regulated, it's out there, it's in the public. And if you do crack down on this, players will end up moving to illegal areas or moving to offshore platforms that are not subject to Indian law. Now, the gaming industry has written to the finance ministry urging for a reconsideration of the decision. Some reports say that the GST Council is saying that a review of the decision is unlikely, but other reports are saying that the Meity minister, for example, will also be asking for a review. So why has this become such a controversial issue? Where does that actually leave the industry? Let's just dive into some of the issues behind all of this. Great to be joined right here in the studio by Ashneer Grover, who's the founder and CEO of Crickpe. Been really agitated by what is happening. Rana is with us, co-founder of Humans of Football, who's going to talk about it a little bit from what gamers are feeling about this. Deepali Pant Joshi is also joining us, former executive director of the RBI. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for joining us. Ashneer, why don't I just start off with you first to understand what is happening. What is the situation earlier? It was 18% on what? On the actual income that was coming to the gaming industry, and now it's 28%, but on the full value of the transaction. Is that a fair summing up?
Yeah. So Vikram, that's correct. So what was happening till now was, let's say there was a pot of 100, and the gaming industry was keeping 10 out of it. So we are paying GST on that 10 part, which is technically our revenue. So we're paying 1.5 rupees out of that 10, and we are net taking 8.5. Now with the new rule coming in and the way it's being read, it means even before the game starts, you have to give 22 rupees GST. So that 1.5 rupee becomes 22. It's a 1300% increase. And that's where the concern of the industry is, that how are we going to absorb this 1300% increase in GST itself?
But GST means, of course, it should be on the value add, right, that is being provided. So you will be able to get set-offs and things like that, I guess. But you're saying that you should, am I understanding you in saying that that earlier it was on the specific amount that you were getting, now it's on the entire pot, and is that your real problem?
Yeah, that is the real concern, because if you look at other industries, right, and I keep comparing it with, it's not a direct comparison, but let's say if you talk about stock exchange, right, if you trade stock, you are paying GST on the brokerage, not on the stock value, right? It's the same in case of mutual funds. Let's take the case of real estate, right? Now, if you've got a broker, he gets you a house, and if the government asks the broker to give, even 18% on the overall value of the house, that's more than his brokerage, 10 times his brokerage. So that's where our concern is, that the principle of GST has always been on value added. So why in this case is it being applied on the whole pot?
So you're saying that if there's 100 rupees that is being put in as a bet, what would you like? Are you arguing that the rate should not be 28, should be 18? Is that your bigger concern? Or is your bigger concern it should only be on the amount that you're getting and not on the full pot? Which would be your bigger concern, or both?
See, of course both are concerned, but the lesser concern, I would say, is the rate increase from 18 to 28. I think if it was only that, we might still be unhappy, but we could live with it. The challenge is that the base on which that 28 is being applied is the real concern, which completely changes the economics. 14 rupees extra is now going to go as tax from the pocket of the gamer to the government. So earlier, if you were playing a game of 100, the winner would have won 28 rupees. Now he's going to net win 14 rupees. And because that return comes down, would the gamer be excited enough to play anymore is our real concern.
All right, what we've heard the Karnataka finance minister, for example, just saying yesterday was, he said that, but if you do that, you only put it on the amount that the industry is making, then the effective rate on the overall pie comes down to less than food, for example, or drink or anything else.
No, it's unfair, as I said, right? See, if you look at food, right, it's being grown, right? So, so it's coming from the ground. So everything is value added in that sense. But I would more compare it with investments and stock exchange and anywhere where money is involved. Rather than, classic example, I used to run a payments company, right? Now, as a payments company, when we used to charge the MDR, we used to pay the GST on the MDR that we used to charge as payment company, not the total payment made by the customer.
Okay. How does this actually work from the point of view of gamers? Because frankly, one of the major things in this is this entire question of what is a game of skill and what is a game of chance. And there is a certain amount of confusion between the two also. What is, obviously chess would be a game of skill. Yeah. Obviously if you're just betting online, doing poker, it's a game of chance. Now somewhere in between is this entire question of how are you selecting a team and what is the best fantasy cricket, and that is somewhere in between there. So how is it going to affect gamers?
See, what happens now is for the gamers, they will bear a huge burden of the taxation that has been implemented, rather than say the companies that are bearing it, and that will make gaming inaccessible to them. And to put a blanket ban is saying, say, online gaming, treating online gaming as a blanket segment and just putting a blanket tax on them. That is, it is making games inaccessible to the gamers. I ran a small survey. I have a community of gamers with me, about 40,000 gamers that are associated with the organization that I co-own. And we ran a small survey over there. And of the 10% of the sample size of the entire community, 75% of the people said they will not be able to engage in further events and leagues and tournaments, provided that these taxes are implemented, the GST is implemented the way it has been proposed. So this is a huge number, 75%, and the remaining 25% also is split in between. 12.5% of the people, they say that maybe they're not sure whether they will be continuing to play or not. So when you talk about numbers in general and a good sample size of that, and when you expand that to say the entire community of gaming that is there in India, which is 400 million people, to 400 different individuals that are engaged in some sort of gaming or the other. It is a huge impact on a lot of people that are looking to get into something.
But you know, when it comes to what people are doing with it, if I'm to play devil's advocate on this, right, it could be argued that a lot of people who are gaming are essentially just gambling. There's not real skill involved. They're not doing anything else. They're just putting in money and it is therefore gambling. So is that a distinction that needs to be drawn? What are people actually doing online?
I think the distinction that needs to be drawn is between gambling and a game of skill. Now, the difference between, now when you say a lot of people are gambling, that should not impact the people who are genuine gamers. That should not impact the people, say, when something like this is monetized, there are winnings involved. Winning is a very small portion of it. There's a huge aspect of it which is just core gaming, which are people trying to get entertainment value out of something. Now, what happens is, for example, when I was growing up, there were playgrounds everywhere. There was accessibility of playgrounds. There were people who were going out in the evening and playing. That culture has gone down. I think we can all agree that culture has gone down. So kids are looking for alternatives. Now, why should these kids be punished who are looking to get into core online gaming?
So the question will be that if you're not doing it for money, right, then there's no GST or anything involved, right? If you're just playing a football tournament, right, or a chess tournament online just, right, for, I don't know, rewards, right, and there's no money in it, there's no GST in it, so that is not being affected. It's only where there's actual money involved and winnings involved that this issue comes in.
The thing is, the competitiveness of something comes in only when there is money involved. You talk about any major tournament that even takes place globally today, any e-sport tournament or anything. It is all oriented, there is a cash prize involved, which is the major catch of it. And that is how it becomes competitive. That's how people want to improve and essentially improve their skill, which we are not recognizing in the online gaming right now.
So the money is essentially the reward. Ashneer, on this point, we've heard, I mean, obviously, Metis have been looking at this and they've been asking about a framework, because the big question is how do you differentiate between pure gambling, which could then be classified as a sin good, which is really the argument that is being made out here. This is a sin of some sort or the other and it should get higher taxation. Pure gambling would be a sin. Pure skill should not be considered a sin. How do you regulate it? What's the framework? And we're hearing, for example, the GST Council and others saying, oh, it's not beyond our, I mean, some of our pay grade. How do we figure out ye hai ki nahi hai?
Yeah. So see, the industry has been around for 10 years and things have evolved. And unfortunately, the way the industry has evolved is that we have gone to the courts. And at the courts, we have sort of proven what is a game of chance or gambling and what is a game of skill. But there is no legislation which has been brought by the government. So there has been no debate on it, whether in the upper house or the lower house. In fact, till a few months back, we thought we, as an industry, were getting more and more recognition because frameworks were being put on when the tax would get collected. For example, there's a clear framework now on when do we need to deduct TDS, how much of that TDS has to be deducted. So we thought that things were moving in the right direction, and the government was also recognizing us as an industry. But out of the blue, this has come and hit us. And I think it's good to have that debate on what is a game of skill, what is a game of chance. But that's best had at the parliament, and for that someone would have to bring a bill. But in this case, what has happened is by bringing this punitive tax in some sense, the industry has been shut down without even having that debate.
Okay, shut down. Right, let me just go to Deepali Pant Joshi now, former director, executive director of the RBI. Deepali ji, the argument that we are hearing here, and let's face it, this is the GST Council that has done it. So, in a sense, there is some sort of all-party consensus, if you like. It's not just one party or the other party that's done this. But this entire question of sin goods and gaming and gambling and online gaming is in some way a sin good and therefore should attract punitive or very high taxation, certainly taxation at the highest bracket. What would be your take on that?
You see, I agree. I don't agree with your distinction between skill and chance. I completely agree that the change in valuation and the computation, the sudden computation, makes taxation excessive, and there is an element of repeat taxation. So this cascading effect. For instance, if I go to Las Vegas and I decide to have a flutter at the tables, I pay just once for the casino. I buy my chips and then I sit at the table and I don't gamble, by the way, but just in case I was to. But here I am an online gamer. I win 2,000. Again, I have to pay GST on the second game which I play. So that is unfair. So that I want to make a very clear distinction. You have 28% GST. All right, fine. I pay up my 28% GST. You cannot tax my winnings again and again. So you can't keep this on par with a casino. Okay. Casino versus online gambling, either you keep it at par, one-time payment. Even if you're a gamer in the US, you just pay for the device, so you pay one time. You don't pay on your winnings.
Okay.
So that cascading effect is what I object to.
Okay, Deepali Pant Joshi, let me just try and come to get where we think this is likely to head. You, ma'am, were former executive director, RBI. If you were given the task right now to say, okay, look, there's obviously industries pushback, as we were just hearing. We know what the GST Council is saying. MeitY is saying, okay, help us to make a framework. What would you do in this entire situation? What would be a fair way out?
I do not want this entire business to move out of the country and go offshore. I do not want the state to lose revenue either. I'll stick to the 28%. I will see that there are no aberrations and anomalies in its imposition. And at the same time, I would evolve a framework where I would have the industry players tell me what to do. I'm a regulator.
Fine. I think it's a fair point to make. Don't drive it offshore. And by the way, also don't drive it illegal, because as we've seen, horse racing, which is what it's been equated with, fine, it happens, it's controlled. But cricket betting, for example, when something goes illegal and goes underground, then it has its own impact. Where do you see this headed? Just a quick comment, final comments from both of you.
I'm not sure where this is headed, but I do think that there should be consultation with the prominent players in the industry. There should be consultation with gaming communities as to what their requirements are and whether how impacted are they by the decisions that are made, and will they be disassociated with the entire gaming community as it is, the global gaming community, because there is a lot of resource that exists here. And when I say resource, I mean as skills. Online gaming is a skill. It is, and
Some of it is, not all of
no,
it
not
is.
all of it. Some of it is,
Yeah.
and that should not be jeopardized by putting a blanket GST taxation.
Ashneer, last word from you. Where do you see this headed?
See, what I would like the government to do, and when I say government, I'm speaking in general, is that they need to come up with a framework which gets debated. Right? I think what needs to be done is that to put this decision in abeyance. Until that time, you come up and have a complete debate, holistic debate on what gaming is, what game of skill is, what game of chance is, and come up with a legislation. Now, when a legislation comes in, then there's no ifs and buts.
And by the way, that could be then expanded. You could also look at some of the things that I was saying about, like, for example, what should happen on actual betting on matches. It's illegal, which is why it's in the hands of the underground mafia and other stuff.
Exactly.
Maybe you regulate that, legalize that in some way, and have real punitive taxation on that.
See, the thing is, if a gamer wants to game, right, you don't want a situation where in India, people open these WhatsApp shops where you're just sending them money on UPI and then hoping you win and get the money back, and there's no tax collected on it.
Yeah.
So the gaming will continue irrespective. You have to recognize that at first. Either it'll move offshore, which is our currency going overseas and having an effect on the dollar rupee exchange rate, or it becomes illegal, where you'll have more and more cases of these online frauds happening.
Okay. So regulate it and do that, and I guess so there obviously has to be a correct framework for all of this. Probably good for everybody, including the government, because the more this thing stays regulated, is there onshore, and the government is collecting a fair amount of taxation on it, and the industry keeps growing, probably best for everybody concerned. But thank you all so much for joining us with your different perspectives. Let's take a look at what is expected out here. This, for example, is what we are hearing from the government and the various voices as to what is likely to happen here. And remember, this is a GST council. So as I said, it's not central government or state government. It's across the board. It's the GST council that's actually taken this decision and taken it unanimously.
Online gaming, horse racing and casinos will be taxed. They will be taxed at 28%, each one, and they will be taxed on full face value. Whatever be the decision on each of the game being either skill or chance-based, or being both or being neither, is not what we are looking at. We are purely looking at that which is being taxed, because it creates value, profit is being made, or a wager is being levied. Based on the wager, people earn windfall, which is what is betting all about. So that's what we've been talking about, and therefore today's decision looks at that aspect of what is to be taxed at what rate.